All right. Thank you so much for having me. Amber, are you able to see my screen?
No.
No. Okay, let me reshare and we will get going. Thank you all so much for being here. How about now, Amber?
Yes, you're good to go.
I had multiple screens up even after all that practice we did. That's the way it goes sometimes, everybody. You have to be very nimble. So I am happy to be here today. We are going to talk about DEI assessments, otherwise known as audits, which may be a little bit intimidating for individuals or your organization. So however you want to think about that, it works for me. It may work for you. It may work for your organization. I've also heard it called other items, but I prefer assessments because it gives you a sense of where you're starting and where you can go to. And it really just depends on what you decide to look at. And that's the big list of items that we're going to look at today. And it was very difficult to put this down into just an hour presentation. So hopefully everybody will walk away with at least one item that you're excited about, or one item that you can take back and investigate to see if it's something that will work for your particular situation. Or as I say, look at a different lens and see how you might be able to do things differently. So we have a few learning objectives that we're going to take a look at, and hopefully you saw those when you excitedly signed up to be here. We're going to demystify the DEI assessment or audit. So some of us may get kind of paralyzed for action because it may seem very overwhelming. And hopefully by the end of our time together today, you'll see that it doesn't have to be that way. We can start simple, we can start small, and just start looking at something, and that will help us determine what next steps we can take from there. We can move beyond checklists to compliance and again, help us get to that strategic level that DEI can bring to an organization and really for the employees. And I call myself a culture catalyst because I've worked over 30 years in HR and training. And in that time, as many of us have, we've seen a lot of things, a lot of flavors of the month, be it in HR, be it in training, and in the area of diversity most recently. And, you know, at the root of that, it's really about the employees and the workers and ourselves. And so we want the efforts that we put forth to be more than just a checklist. And that's really what's going to bring about big change for the companies that we invest our time with as employees. And this, as we talk about this work, it will help us identify some gaps and some opportunities for the teams that we work with, for our organizations and our workplaces. And what we're all looking for, we want to be confident DEI leaders with the work that we bring to the organizations, what brings us joy, how we invest our time when we're away from our families, and the work that we hope that we make a difference with as we are, you know, spending our years working and working towards that. Fill in the blank, however you want to spend the rest of your years there in the sunset. So those are the four things that we hope to accomplish during our time together. And again, I would ask that you each look for one takeaway. I like to call them ahas. That's what I had, like the little light bulb there at the beginning. But, you know, one takeaway that you're going to look at differently after the time together today, because, you know, I believe small incremental changes can lead to big results. And you know, continue to work towards change. So I've got a question for you to start with. So why do organizations do strategic planning? So if you could just take a moment and reflect on that, if you've ever had the opportunity to attend a strategic planning. I know we are in webinar mode, so when I ask these rhetorical questions, it will be more of self-reflection, perhaps taking some notes for yourself as we talk through the topics. But, you know, I've got some bullet points up there and I will share some information about those. But strategic planning, why do organizations participate in strategic planning? And from your experience, what was the outcome of that strategic planning? So I'll give you about 30 seconds.
We
Okay,
have
we
a
have
comment, great way to identify where you are to where you need to go.
absolutely. If we don't measure or if we don't talk about current state, then it's really difficult to identify a path forward. And for some companies, depending on where you are, strategic planning may be looking at the next year. It may be looking at the next 24 months. We often hear about 5 years forward. And in today's marketplace with employees, you know, some of the people that may be at that planning table, they may not say it out loud, but, you know, maybe thinking 5 years, 5 months. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be here that long. We certainly hope so as leaders and as contributors to an organization, but strategic plan can mean a lot of different things. So looking at the bullet point list here, you know, one of the things that come to mind for organizations is that goal alignment. Like, what's our purpose? Why are we here? What are we working towards? And when I think of this, I like metaphors a lot with group talk and with training, but, you know, I think of the crew rowing. And I don't know how many of you have ever tried to participate in even like canoe with family, but crew rowing is pretty magical if you ever watch the videos or if you watch initial training of that. So maybe that's your takeaway. Google that. But you know, they have to, that's some serious teamwork. So if you think about an organization, you know, strategic planning and getting people working in the same direction is vitally important for the success of not just the individual or a specific department, but for the whole organization. And then next, I call it resource allocation, as many do, but, you know, where are we going to spend our money? Where are we going to spend our time? Where are we going to put the energy and the focus for the next fill in the blank of that planning that you're trying to do? And then risk management. You know, what challenges do we have? This may be where your SWOT chart comes into place, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for the organization. And then this is probably a big one that many organizations have been facing, the change management phase. Like, how are we going to adapt? How are we going to be nimble to keep up with what has been happening recently with just such a dynamic environment, with regulations changing, with recruiting and retention being so difficult, with demands being placed on us coming from every direction? And how are we going to communicate this throughout our different stakeholders? Stakeholders look different for every organization, internal, external. And how are we going to maintain our competitive advantage amongst all of these changing items that are coming in our direction? And then what does performance look like? How do we measure it as both a company, as our employees, as a good community citizen, as a good global citizen, et cetera? So hopefully these are a few of the items that organizations are investing in when they're talking about and looking at and spending time with strategic planning. So some of you may be thinking, I did not sign up for a strategic planning course. So why are we starting here? Because it's really important when we talk about a DEI plan or a program. So when you think about DEI programs, initiatives, way back when we first started talking about this term of diversity, many leaders, many employees, many companies may have thought of training. Oh, we'll just offer out kind of like harassment. We'll just offer out a 1-hour training. We'll make all employees go through a training program, and that will fix it. That will, you know, we can say we did it. We're leading edge. We're best in class, and you know, we'll be leaders in diversity. Now, here we are in 2024, almost ending first quarter, entering second quarter here. And that's not so much the case, as we know, as leaders in the DEI space, not so much. And you can't just check a box or put somebody in a seat of, you know, head of diversity, chief diversity officer, and all things change. So strategically talking, we need to plan for diversity. And this is going to be really important for us. So strategic planning and DEI, what does that look like for us? So I should have had a poll here, Amber, to say, you know, how many of us engage, how many of our organizations engage in actual strategic planning and DEI? How many of those go hand in hand? And so why is this important? Because we're seeing how important when we don't do that, things get chopped. We're seeing positions get eliminated. We're seeing budgets get eliminated from the DEI function. And so the higher we can raise the awareness of how strategic diversity is and how it should be woven through all of the programs within the organization, the more value it brings. And setting DEI goals and objectives, tying those throughout the organization can be vitally important for an organization. And making sure that they're smart. So if we were in a traditional classroom or a traditional webinar, we would use the raise hand function, but how many of you that have programs and initiatives around DEI, BA, add any of the initials at the end of it, but really around culture, around diversity, how many of those that have goals and objectives are smart? They're measurable, that we can really say at the end of whatever your measurement period is, that either yes, we achieved that, or no, we didn't. So that's really where the rubber meets the road. And then when you look at the next bullet point there, the stakeholder engagement, are we operating in a silo of just one to a department of diversity individuals or specialists pushing out initiatives, or does it start at the top and at the bottom like a sandwich, offering out and getting everyone involved in the DEI initiatives and the programs? And that resource allocation again, the people that are involved, the departments, the money that's being distributed to make these things happen. And it's not always about the money. It can be about time, which that's a resource. We can't get that back if we choose to invest in DEI versus employee engagement activities versus rewards and recognition. People are going to take upon them what they want to invest in. And yes, all those things are related that I just mentioned, but some organizations see them as very separate. So if we don't have a strategy that weaves them together, we may miss the mark on certain things. Amber, I see some red dots. Is there anything we need to stop and address at the moment?
We do have a question. Is a credential necessary to complete a DEI assessment?
Oh, that's a great question. And we can answer that now, or we can answer that at the end, or both, and revisit. But my answer to that would be no, that it's not. But it is going to be important that whoever is completing the assessment, and especially developing some type of assessment, has enough information to know what you're measuring, what's available, and what the potential impact of the data that you're collecting and what you're going to do with that may look like. So thank you for asking that. But of course, IDC and the Society for Diversity would love for you to partake in that program and learn more about, the impact of that. Good question. All right. And then moving on to why strategic planning and the DEI is so important and goes hand in hand to kind of set the stage for this is the reason why we're here, the measurement and that accountability. So like all things, if we don't have a benchmark, if we're not measuring things, then we have no way to say if we've met, if we haven't met, how we need to improve, or where we've fallen short, or what we've done really well, what we need to do more of, and where we want to, in fact, put more resources. And then on the accountability framework, we don't know which areas have done really well, which ones have fallen short, and which ones may need more resources, which ones may need less resources. So basically, things fly under the radar really well when we're not measuring anything. And so measurement and accountability actually is a really good thing for a lot of different reasons. It doesn't have to be seen as a negative thing, or, oh my goodness, they're going to start measuring, that means they're going to cut. It can actually raise the strategic benefit of many areas. Back in the day when I was strictly focused on HR, one of the biggest differences that I made in an organization that was very large, they weren't measuring any of the metrics around human resources, and were dumping money in like crazy, and couldn't understand why employees were coming in to one of the what the leadership team thought was one of the most prestigious areas of the organization, and basically then going out very quickly. So they raised salaries, they raised basically the training for some of the supervisors, but failed to focus on the frontline employees, so the entry level positions. And so after conducting some data research, basically I found that they were basically, what is it called? Like with fraternities and sororities, like the hazing process, like, if you stay with us or if you make it through this very kind of unpopular or uncomfortable situation, then we know you're in for good. And then we'll kind of bring you into our network and we'll start treating you like one of the real employees. And so it was an informal hazing process going on. And so they were having the new hires do, this was not the situation, but just imagine if for your 8-10 hours of your shift, you were hired to be a technical employee, for example, and you were basically shredding papers all day. So one of the unmentionable or most boring tasks that you could imagine, that's what you were stuck doing for 5 days a week, paid very well to do so. And there was no training involved because they didn't have time to train you. And so I collected data on how much money had been spent, how much had been invested, and how many people had come and gone. And it was amazing once the data was shared, how much more attention was paid to that area, rather than just saying turnover is so bad. We don't understand. And so data can really make a difference to change and how we impact that. So again, I'm sure some of you have great examples from different areas, but that was one that really came to mind. If you don't measure it, you have no way to impact it with any more than just emotion or panic in some cases. And then that leads to assessment and analysis. So then you have information. So then what? How can we make an impact? And where do we want to focus attention and resources from that point forward once you have data or information? And maybe it means go collect more or different information or in a different area, but at least it's a start. I akin this to kind of, looking under the hood or looking under rocks. So it's like a treasure hunt, right? You start in one area and say, here's what we think we want to measure, because we're not currently measuring anything. And so let's start with this, see if we can identify trends and patterns. And then once we start getting that, we'll get really good information to either identify trends and start making a difference, or expand the search to then collect more information. And then that's where the magic starts happening, because you can start integrating that with your overall strategy and your goals and how you are actually making a difference throughout your organization. And then, sparkles and glitter come out, because that's where you can make a difference with your overall improvement. And improvement is going to look different for every organization, because that may be recruiting, it may be retention, it may be the public relations that you have within, your community. It may be, you're highlighted in a magazine as being best practice, and people want to copy what you're doing and scale that throughout different organizations throughout the industry. So the sky is really the limit with what you can do if you start with that strategic planning and the DEI initiatives with that. So hopefully that kind of lays the foundation about why I'm so passionate and so excited about why data. Because at heart, I'll tell you back here, I'm an HR person and I do not like numbers. I really don't. I can do payroll if I need to in a crunch. So the real true numbers I don't like, but the patterns, the data, the metrics, give me that any day. I love it, because I know we can make a process improvement, and I know we can make a difference with employees and in the culture that way. So that's why it gets me so charged up about it. All right. How are we doing? All right, I'm going to keep moving on. Hopefully you're getting keyed up about this as much as I am. So there are several quotes out there. The one that came to my mind when I thought about this was, what gets measured gets done. And there's some controversies around that, about who said it, if it was even said. And then, what came to my mind around it when I was thinking about a quote was, okay, so what you care about gets measured. And then that may not actually really fit either. So I found this one. I thought it was really good. So data are just summaries of thousands of stories. Tell a few of those stories to help make the data meaningful. And so I thought that might be the best thing to kind of kick this part off as we go. And really try to think about what stories might be present within your organization that you might be able to capture or tell if you started tracking or doing DEI assessments or audits. So think just for a moment, what stories might be out there that you might be able to uncover or tell if you capture DEI data. I'm sure a lot of stories. And so hopefully that plants at least a few seeds for you to think about, if you're not currently collecting data, where could you start? And again, I've got a short list at the end here that I'll share with you about some places that you could start if you're not currently collecting data, because it really is, you could go crazy when you start looking at data. But one of the best pieces of advice I have is, if you are going to do an assessment, you don't have to start grandiose. You can start, very focused in one area and kind of do a litmus test on that. And then you can expand from there. You don't have to, have, if you're thinking about pages, you don't have to start with a 10-page assessment and then be like, oh, it was so overwhelming. You could start small with just, a very small assessment or audit and go from there. Somebody shared that, retention rates, what story would your retention rates tell if you were to look at that and pull together some meaningful data of the stories that would weave through your organization and tell, through the DEI lens there. So I'll leave that with you as we continue to move along here. We got a lot of ground to cover, and I am very excited about it. So this may not be news to many of the participants that are watching live or watching the recorded of this webinar here, but just want to make sure we were all with familiar information. But there was a Supreme Court decision back in 2023 that affected many of the universities about acceptance rates. And so that put a tailspin on a lot of DEI programs that, I even had people say to me like, oh, we can't do our DEI programs because, the Supreme Court. But the good news is for organizations is that, if you're doing diversity programs correctly or initiatives, then, hopefully you're not setting quotas or you're not saying, we've got to have a token this or a token that. That's why I like to look at these programs as, what is it? What is the purpose of your diversity program? What are you trying to accomplish with your diversity initiatives overall? If it is a, hey, we looked around and we've got all, white females, that are in their 50s, like a Sherry Bender in here. And so now we need to mix it up a little bit. And so we've got this list, of what we want. That's probably really not the right approach for creating a diversity program. You want it to reach your goals. Why do you want to be diverse? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And keep in mind, as employers, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is still alive and well. Discrimination on any level is still not something that we should want to inhibit, encourage. We do want to inhibit, we don't want that. And so we shouldn't make any decisions or have any programs that allow discrimination based on any of those protected categories. And so we've seen time and time again through all diversity actions that, diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of everything for organizations can be beneficial. And so these things are good. They go hand in hand. And so I think there was some overreaction to that decision And that created some of that, downplay of DEI, elimination of DEI programs that we saw. And so talking about how we weave our programs and our efforts into the organization's goals, the vision, the mission, the values, if you have them, this may be a good time to revisit the organization's mission statement. And, I use the proverbial, if you have a lobby, if you're working, in a physical structure, some organizations were so excited, to have them framed and updated and those nice, the wooden plaques, and some of them were very fancy, but they were very long. And so my question was, do the employees really know what that means? Do they live it? Can they recite what the vision and value and mission statement is of the organization? So if you layer on a DEI mission statement or goal to that, are they going to remember and are they going to live that one out? How about your senior leaders, your CEO? I mean, we want these things to be living and breathing throughout the organization so that we can see them. So if your mission statement is, we want to change lives every day through whatever you do, through making, the best car seats or through, cutting edge medicine or whatever it is. I mean, a short mission statement is probably okay because your employees can see it, they can remember it, and they can probably give you some really good examples of how that affects their job. And so my recommendation is, brush that thing off. And if it's old and needs to be updated, that's great. And then how does the DEI initiative fit through that? Because that's how you're going to be able to streamline these assessments and audits to be able to see them through all of the different items that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. So does your culture fit the mission? Because it's going to be kind of hard to build a DEI measurable program from that. And
Sherry, we have a question.
Sure.
The question is, I'm curious, is there any concerns with sharing our pay equity progress and how we have bridged the gap for women and people of color? We show we show identify women in PLC by job groups and where we were at 2021, 2022, and 2023.
I think that's a total organizational decision when you decide that you are going to measure these things, and how you share that. For some organizations, pay information can create some ripple effects that are not necessarily positive. For others, it can share very positive results. But it's definitely a strategic decision to make when you start into these initiatives, how and what information you're going to share, and then how you're going to follow up with the employees from that data. So, I think having transparency and sharing information, is always a good thing, in my opinion. So I don't think there's any one right or wrong way, how to do that. And if you're a government, organization, it's a requirement to do the pay equity studies. And so sharing that information can only add to more transparency. Okay, thank you for that. So having said all of that, we're going to revisit the mission statement, the values. That's going to lead to the most success. I mean, in order for the most successful companies to have buy-in of DEI programs, to allow anyone, whether it's an internal person or an external person, to come in and do an assessment and audit of kind of all things DEI or even part of things DEI, you've got to have that support. And, so again, I told you I liked metaphors, but it's just easy for me to think of it. And hopefully, this will help someone that's listening or will be listening. But, think of DEI as the backbone of the organization. If in the human body, we have to have support, we don't think about it, but our spine is supporting us as we go about our daily life. So I'm not having to tell the L4 and the L5 way down here to hold myself up and keep my structure straight. So if this were DEI throughout the organization, that's going to play a very important role to the success of the initiative. And so that's going to be the support of leadership, the support of the stakeholders, the support of the employees. you've probably, this is left unsaid, but you've probably got to do some definitions around what DEI means for your organization, what it looks like. And then, departments that are out there on their own. So if that's the right hand or the left, I guess that'd be the right hand of the person. They're not going to be very successful if we leave that right hand, with 3 people out here on their own. We need that support and the structure and all of the systems that go along with that to help support that right hand, whatever department that would represent in your organization. And so for DEI initiatives to be the most effective, and for the programs that you may be assessing, it's got to be a non-negotiable that your leadership team supports the efforts, because guess what? Employees are pretty smart. They know if there's not that support, if it's just a head nod. Yeah, we're going to do this assessment, but we're not going to plan to change anything after we see the results. I use the example with this. This could be a handbook. Again, I've worked in HR forever. This could be when you write a handbook, and some of the managers aren't going to follow the policies in the handbook. It's like standing at the end of the ocean with waves coming in. If I had a little teaspoon and I'm trying to change the direction of the tidal wave coming in, it ain't going to happen. And so support for any initiative throughout the organization as the backbone is 100% non-negotiable. And so, unfortunately, as a practitioner for whatever it is, in this case, DEI, you may be very passionate about it. You may believe it with your whole heart. You may want culture change to happen yesterday. But sometimes if we don't have that support and that foundation in place, you've got to assess how much of it, what's the percentage? Is it a 40-60? Is it a 20-80? Is it a 99% support? When is it, that you're in, and when is it that you're not in? Because for it to be successful, it's got to be a non-negotiable. So
We do have a question, Sherry.
Oh, good. I love questions.
How can an organization work toward a racially and ethically diverse workforce in this climate of DEI when words like quotas are used to define demographic targets?
Yeah, I mean, I think quotas are just inappropriate. They're just, outdated for what we are trying to do in the whole DEI realm of work. If you're an affirmative action employer, you certainly have goals for underrepresented areas. But I think it is an educational gap for individuals that use the term quota. And I don't, we can have conversations around that, but I don't know, how we can change that with a magic wand. And some people we just can't change. I always use the term you gotta wanna, and some people just don't want to change, it makes my heart sad. But goals are one thing, quotas are totally different things, and quotas are not where DEI work is going to happen. So I don't know that I answered the question of how can we, but my belief is that it starts with that leadership support from the top. It starts with education. It's not a one-time thing. It is, kind of like I've got a slide that says DEI is a destination. I mean, it's a journey, not a destination. And it's definitely not that check the box activity. I had a client that called me, and wanted to have a discovery call and said, do you do trainings that I can come sit in on? Because, we've got our employees asking for diversity, and, I just want to take this back so I can do it. And I was like, share more about what it is. What do you want to do? And they were like, well, I just feel like that, I just need to be doing it. And I was like, yeah, I try to be very professional, right? And I'm like, well, you can't just really do it. Like, diversity is not something you just do. Like, it's your culture. It's like, it's integrated. It's about what it feels like to work there. It's about how you treat people. It's about what your policies say and then what you're doing, to live out those policies. It's about, are people leaving because they don't feel like they're being treated fairly? And I went on and on and on. And needless to say, I did not end up working with that client. But that was just a real interesting take on doing it. So I think there's a lot of work to be done out there. I see another question, maybe, or comment.
Yes. The first one is, will we go through the assessment steps in this webinar?
We are going to be talking about the different types of assessments. We are heading there right now. And so starting out with what is the DEI or what is an assessment, there's no one type of assessment, or one type of audit. It can vary widely depending on how far you want to go within the organization, what the organization is willing to look at. And so like this topic in general, it can be very touchy for an organization, but it's basically the process of getting some data, getting some information about key DEI factors for an organization. So we do have a poll, actually. Do you want to go ahead and pull that first poll up, Amber? So it's basically to find out, and you can answer multiple ones, but what are the reasons why DEI data is important for you, the people that are on this call, not necessarily your organization?
All right, we're at 50%, so give them a few more minutes or seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we're almost at 80%. All right, Sherry, it's your call. We're at 90%.
All right, I think that's good. Yep. Let's see what they say.
Okay, so we have 62% raises awareness and accountability in initiatives. We have 56% identify appropriate interventions. 72% measure the effectiveness of efforts. 72% increases awareness of potential DEI gaps. 49% demonstrates the organization's commitment. 0%, I'm not really sure.
Okay. Yeah, so spot on. Like all of these items could be the reasons why we want to take on an assessment looking at DEI. And then, like we talked about earlier, it's really going to be about how you choose to use that information that you get back from the assessment and what you choose to do with it. Because, if you just pull data from your HRIS system and look at that, it could be a quiet assessment. Nobody even knows that you're doing that. And so that could just be for informational purposes, and you share that with the CEO and no one else. If you go a different route where you're going to look at qualitative data, where you're going to talk to people and do focus groups and interviews, then your employees are going to be curious about what you're going to do with that information. And it's a trust building process. And, if I share this with you, am I going to see change? So we want to make sure, again, when you're building that, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to share the information? And what's the value of the information? So, other considerations when you're thinking about embarking on this is we want to ensure that there is some progress, no matter how it feels small, and we want to identify gaps between current state and any future goal that you want to have, be it, we know retention is difficult, or we know turnover is high, but we're just not real sure why. And so if you're going to start looking at your turnover data, be mindful and be open to the numbers or the information that you may get there, and then see if there's anything that you can do about that to impact that. And keep in mind that it's a journey, not a destination. It may not be a once and done. Your initial assessment may show you that you need to broaden the data that you're pulling and that you're looking for. So here's a sample of what types of data you can look at. So quantitative is usually what we think of first. This is your very easy to measure surveys. It's data that you might have available in your HR system. It may be data that you have in Salesforce, another type of tracking system that you already have. It may be, training numbers. It may be feedback from surveys that you already have. And so this is, things that you can put in, and you can pretty easily pull together a chart. You can pull together, a graph, the speedometer. I love those, like that have the colors and show you how you're doing on those things. And then perhaps where you get a little bit more in detail information, but it's a little bit more difficult to put it into a condensed, summarized version, is the qualitative information or surveys. So this can be your climate surveys. This can be focus groups. It can be policy and procedure reviews. This can be your equity audits and meetings. So some examples of some of these that may challenge you a little bit that you hadn't thought about. So with meetings, are you giving people equal time to talk in meetings? Or is it just a free-for-all where everyone is allowed to chime in when they feel like it? Or do you have, time, so that at the end or the beginning, everybody gets the floor for a set amount of time? This takes into effect your introverts and your extroverts. Are you sharing your agendas ahead of time so that people have time to think about, process, and decide what they want to bring to the meetings? Policies and procedures reviews, looking at your hiring processes. Who decides on hiring? Do you have different levels of job categories that are involved in the hiring processes? Different tenures of people that are involved in your hiring processes? Those types of things. Training and equity and availability for development. Who's participating? Who has access to your training programs, your educational funds? This also feeds into the quantitative when you look at your promotion rates and things of that nature. So some of it may be a hybrid of qualitative and quantitative surveying or assessments or audits. And so that's why I said it's so deep and wide how you can build this, that it really depends on where you want to focus, or if you can initially identify something that's concerning to think about. So when I put this out here, the next question that I think we have, our last poll, is asking you what you are currently measuring. So let's take a look at that poll and see what our participants that are on might be tracking now.
Before we launch this, the poll, is there okay if we answer a question really quick in the chat?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Can you please expand on the equity audits and what that entails?
Mm-hmm. So equity audits, that can be like your pay audits, where you're looking at tenure in different jobs and like what the pay bands are, if you even have pay. Like I recently conducted an audit for an organization, and they had no compensation structure. They had no pay philosophy. And so looking back over the last couple years, some people were getting a 1% increase. Other people were getting 44% increases. There were no rhymes or reasons to that. As we discussed further, there were some discussions, but nothing documented that supported why those things had been done. But there was, the EEOC clock is 24 months for a discrimination case. So, if an employee, all employees are really nice until they're not, or until they decide, what, I can't pay my bills, so I need more money. So they may decide on that 23rd month that they're going to file that EEO claim. And so, we want to make sure that we are treating people equitably through all of our policies and procedures. Like I mentioned, access to training, access to educational funds, really any policy that you have, running that through, do people have equal access to things that are beneficial, time off, travel, benefits, cars, any cell phones, anything that's monetary or of value, demographics, position, time and company, time and position are the different things that you want to check with that. Does that help? Okay. All right. So let's see the people that are on the call. Let's see what types of items you might currently be tracking. And you can do multiple choice for this as well if you're currently tracking more than one. And if you're not tracking, you don't have to participate.
Okay, we're at 65% right now. So I'll give them about 30 more seconds.
Okay. And while we're waiting, other items just to be mindful of is like meeting times. If you have people in multiple time zones, when are you regularly scheduling meetings? Or are you rotating them around so that there's equal opportunity to attend those? Rewards and recognition. I was talking to a client yesterday and they said, oh, we're really looking for some new ways to, get people excited when they meet goals. We do a lot with food, but then later they mentioned that they have some hybrid employees. And I said, oh, so how do you include the hybrid workers when you do the on-site meals? And they said, oh, we really don't do anything for those employees. And when I did the calculation, it was about 25% that work remotely, that never come into the office. And so, I mentioned that there's some reward programs where all employees can get involved and they can give each other points when they want to recognize or when they, hit a milestone or whatever. And you can save up your points, you can transfer them over to other people, what have you. And some people like gift cards, some people like restaurants or whatever. And that way, people can use them for what they want, or they can cash them out for time off. And they were like, oh, that's a really good idea, but we still really like doing the food in person. And I was like, I didn't say this, but I was like, I wonder how the employees feel that kind of get left out. And so when I shared the idea, I said, well, but that would be a way to include your, remote workers that never get to participate in the in-person meals. So just, again, things to think about when you're looking at, all of the ways that this accessibility and how we treat people can come across when we're looking at programs in general. Okay, what was the result of our survey?
All right, so only 78% participated, but 84% general demographic data, 56% hiring and recruitment, 31% pay equity, 72% employee satisfaction and engagement, 59% exit interviews and termination data, 25% coaching and disciplinary, 50% training and development participation, 16% promotion rates, 47% workplace culture and climate, 22% community engagement and impact, 9% supplier diversity.
Okay, that's good. And, some of us may not be yet tracking anything, and that's fine. And then the follow-up questions that I always have is, what are we doing with that information? Like yesterday, one of my roommates from college actually is getting ready to change jobs. And she was like, I don't know if I'm going to tell my truth in the exit interview. And I was like, well, you have to know what they do with the exit interview data. Like, some companies just don't do anything with the data. So, you just got to know what they do with it. And you've got to decide how important your truth is to share with the organization. And so I don't know what she'll end up doing with it, but what what are we really doing with the data that we're collecting? Is it meaningful? Is it making an impact? Are we making change? Are we pivoting? Are we just filing the data away and doing nothing with it? Because if that's the case, we may want to pivot from that and do our focus on something where we are going to be truly making an impact on that. And, I could go on and on with all the things we can look at, like, a form that I often use looks at like with interviews, like delegation, like who is your go-to people? Are you always delegating to the same people? And you may say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it's either a give or a take an opportunity away from someone else that may be interested in potential cross-training or promotional opportunities. And so as a supervisor or a leader that has that authority to be able to do that, we have to be mindful of even those signals of delegation to other individuals, because that can make a difference. So that's not really a written policy, but that is a practice that often takes place within organizations. And so people don't think about that and the signals that sends out. So in an overall audit, those are some things that could be considered to be looked at. So it's not really measurable, but it is something to bring awareness to. And then that could be something that then you follow up with a training on that could make a difference, across the board over time. So,
We do
all
have a
right.
question.
Okay.
What do you recommend in organizations where there is survey distress and people are fearful of filling out surveys?
Oh, yes. So that is unfortunate when that has happened, because, that happens for several reasons. I'm guessing either there's just been so many surveys that have been either not followed up on, or maybe big changes have followed as a result of a survey. So the trust is a little bit lower. So you can pivot to some of the different methods that we've looked at, like the focus groups or the interviews. There are pulse surveys, which are smaller, 3 to 5 questions that are spread out more over time. You can do informal, like interviewing with people. You can kind of do a roving. I don't know what your work situation is or how large you are, if that would even make sense. And you can do if you have ERGs, if you do employee groups, if you do meetings, departmental meetings, those are some ways that you can get data and do sensing as well. Or if you have a specific topic that you're concerned about, you could do meetings on that topic to kind of get feedback on that. For example, and this, take this or leave it, but like in healthcare, I know a big point of contention is if they're looking at either changing shift times or if they're changing uniform colors. And so while that's not specifically related to DEI, but they cause a lot of angst for employees. And so with that, you could call specific meetings to just discuss those 1 or 2 topics and get feedback like well in advance of taking any action. So people that are interested come, you ask questions around that, you get their feedback, you take it, and then you decide what you're going to do. Before that, you give them the feedback. Here's the results of what we heard. Here's the pros and cons, and here's how we're going to move forward. So that's what I'd recommend. There's probably other things too, but that's just off the cuff. Okay. Good. I love having questions. That makes it great, especially here in the webinar format. All right. So other things to think about. I've talked a little bit about the learning and development, that you can look at that. Other things are community engagement. Like, again, I mentioned the PR, like, do you look at your Google ratings? Like, what are people saying about you that are leaving? Community engagement, like the volunteerism, like your partnerships that you have, mentorship opportunities. Are you having your employees, like that is a big one. Do you give your employees mentorship opportunities that are either internal or external to the organization? And then supplier diversity. We didn't have a lot of people saying they were doing that within their organization here, but that's another one. Again, some have mandatory supplier diversity programs, and then others are just, looking at how can they diversify and support different types of businesses to continue with that, stream of influence and interest with their diversity programs. So again, those are areas that you could look under if you're looking at measuring things and impact that you're working on. So I didn't want to leave those out as we were talking about different areas. I see we have some more red dots at the top, maybe questions or comments.
Yes, we have 3 questions. Do you want to continue through the presentation or do you want to wait to the end?
Yeah, I'm almost to the end here, and then we can go to those if we
Okay.
want to. So when you're thinking about creating a survey or when you're looking at options that might be available, some of them can be just as simple as yes, no. So are we doing this or do you agree with this? And you can have management team participate in the survey. You yourself as the DEI person or as the leader of a specific area can assess kind of the program. You know, are you doing it now? Yes or no. You can do the Likert scale. So usually that's a 5-point scale, but it's like the strongly agree, the agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. You can do a numerical scale, which, you know, you tell them what the 1, what the 5 mean, and they rate from there. You can also do something where you're rating the current state. So is this something that we're currently doing or not doing? And then how important is this for us? So that helps you if you're newer to your diversity initiatives or programs. This helps you with what you're doing and how you're doing it, as well as prioritizing what you want to work on for the go forward. And then you can also look at the impact. And that can be, I kind of think of that as like you might want to do a pyramid this way, but you know, what types of audience, how many people, like what's the reach of this program and how large of an impact is it? So like for turnover, for example, that is impacting people that have already decided to leave us. But if we're doing something like stay interviews where we're spending time talking to people that are currently still employed with us, finding out what we're doing well, what we could be doing differently, you know, do they feel like there's disparate impact in certain areas? Do they feel like they have equal opportunity to the training? Have they taken part in training? Has their supervisor are they aware that there's training opportunities? Depending on what we want to survey about, then we have an opportunity to make an impact and a difference to the stay interviews. So that could impact all of our current employees as well. And so you can kind of weigh the impact and decide where you want to put those resources when you're looking at resource allocation. Maybe if you're not only doing stay interviews in 1 or 2 departments, that might be an area where you determine that you want to spread and scale the stay interviews to the whole organization and kind of see what you start hearing back from those. So the impact question is not always included, but it can really help you decide, you know, where's the focus area we want to look at. And then timeline and duration, that can help you determine, like, is something new? So maybe we're not going to see results on it right away, or has it been in place for 3 years? And what's the return on investment for something, you know, as we're looking at that. And then other things to think about as you're starting to take this journey or expand on this journey of assessments and measurement, make sure that you're understanding your organization. Again, I started out talking about strategic planning, revisiting your strategic DEI goals. You know, if we're really going to do this work, it has to be for a purpose. You know, a lot of people say, what's your why when they're talking about various things, but what's your organization's why for diversity? Like if you ask that to your president or CEO, like, what does diversity mean to you? You know, I always tell people, I'm like, you know, if we went and found your person that felt least inclusive or least included with your organization, how would they describe diversity here? How would they, you know, how would they describe what it feels like to work at your organization? And they're like, oh my goodness, that's a really good question. I'm like, well, I mean, everybody's going to have a different view of what it means here. But if we're going to lead DEI for the organization, we need to have a true understanding of our organization and then what DEI, belonging, accessibility, whatever, you know, acronyms are important for your organization, what that means. And then how can we see it? You know, how do we know it's alive and well here? Clarify those objectives. Don't have too many, because, you know, then you may not be successful for your plan year or your 6 months or your 12 months to measure those. That non-negotiable support, remember the visual of the spine. We've got to have it from the top and the bottom. And that means employees having their understanding of it, and all of the leaders. And then if we're going to measure things or do that assessment, start small. It can be a once a year benchmarking. You can look at it every 6 months like a report card. You can look at 3 things. You can look at 10 items, but decide what that is and then test it out. See, do that litmus test and then share the data and talk about how it is. Some places do an annual report of those things. Share, don't be afraid of it. It's your data. It's what you're doing. And then you can improve and change from there. And then update and go from there. So I think that's my last slide. It is. So I am ready for questions, for dialogue until Amber tells me we're done, which is almost.
All right. So the first question, can you recommend a template for a DEI leadership scorecard? Something user-friendly and easy to track quarterly.
I don't know if we have any of those on the society or not. I don't have any that are free. So I don't know, Amber, if you're aware of any, we can check.
Okay, I'll see.
Okay.
All right. The second question is, what would be your recommendation if an organization is resistant to DEI training and supporting DEI initiatives, especially from top management?
So with that one, I would definitely start with, finding an area where you can start gathering some stories, gathering some data, kind of like I shared with you that HR example where we had no data and we were able to gather that data through things that mattered. And eventually your story will shine through that data, through that information, and find that, I don't want to say the pain point, but find what matters in your organization and continue to share that with your stakeholders, which is probably your executive team. And eventually you will make your way with that. I truly believe that.
What strategies do you use to help the organization to use the data they are gathering to create positive change?
So with that, it's just an over time, identifying what are the numbers telling you, what's the patterns, and then what makes sense for an initiative that's going to reach your audience and your culture. And that's not going to be overwhelming. What makes sense? It doesn't make sense to, go out and talk about something you've talked about every year if that's not what your numbers are saying. If retention's not a problem, then don't talk about retention. Talk about something else. Talk about training and development. Maybe we need more access to training. Maybe we need more leadership training about that delegation that I mentioned. Maybe it's a frontline skills issue. So maybe it's about moving the pieces within the organization. So it's really about letting the data tell a story and then being open to what that story is telling you.
The other question is, will you share the slides in the recording?
Yes, I am going to send the slides to Amber, and then Amber is going to send the slides out to the group.
What credentials would a DEI auditor typically have?
Well, I have the CDE from the Society for Diversity, and I think that if it's something that you're going to go outside of your organization, they are going to look for some kind of certification in order to make it credible. But again, inside your organization, I think, if you have the knowledge and the information, you'll be able to start small with that to make those incremental differences because you do know your organization.
All right, there were a few in the chat. Okay. Do you have any recommendations for tools, resources to help us craft thoughtful survey questions?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll include some at the end here. I'll edit the resources and I'll give you some links for some of those.
Okay. And then the other one is, okay, this one is long. Those were all internal options regarding survey distress. DEI audits are often dealing in sensitive data and participants fear breach of confidentiality. That means anonymity is one key, which can be guaranteed through some survey software. Hiring and DEI auditors and analysts is another. Delivering only aggregate data and trend reports to management. Those data and reports can then be converted into action plans led by internal DEI, of course, but gathering data can usefully be outsourced to enhance trust and boost participation rates, right?
hmm Yeah, and that is definitely a choice. And I think, in having those dialogues with the partner, that's going to be key because, some clients will say, I want to know who participated. And so that is definitely available, or you can make it anonymous. And so I think that's something that, how are you going to use that data is a good question to ask to the client at the outlay, because it's definitely a trust builder. DEI is sensitive. And, I know some people that are like, I'm not filling out a survey no matter who it comes from, because I know they can always track it back. So that is a definite concern with surveys.
All right. Did one another? Okay. No, that's all the questions.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining and for watching. And we will send out the PowerPoint for you. And please let me know if you have any questions.